Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Because we have SubTight Redux today. Now, when I have a Redux plugin, what that means is I have had a previous plugin, and I came out with something that was a significant enough update that it was worth updating it in place and changes behavior. So here's what's going on with SubTight. It initially came out of, a Creature or something like that, and is a plugin that can be tailored to use the rather strange Creature algorithm. It sounds like a weird, huge distortion or something, to tighten up subsonics, low frequencies. And we're going to fool around with some of the measurements of this thing, and you can see what it does. But when I first came out with it, I felt that the way that it worked didn't interact with the sample rate in normal ways, and so I put out first console MC, first SubTight and then console MC, without compensating for sample rate. And what that ended up doing to console MC was that as he went to increasingly higher sample rates, it got more bright and zingy and rolled off more of the bass, and I caught this in time and put forth an update, actually quite recently. I put out the update at the height of everybody's grand Cyber Monday, all that kind of stuff, because there's not a lot of point in somebody my size putting out stuff at that time when people are spending so much money and effort to compete against each other for attention. I'll have interesting things coming up. This is more of a performance update, but it does give us an opportunity to reinvestigate what SubTight does. So let's step over here. And here is SubTight against a meter, which people might recognize as Vox-Echo span, because Vox-Echo span is awesome. And if we play this drum track, you can see that we have a steep control and a trim control. Steep control is how many layers of this algorithm are in use, and more layers means that it's going to be more distinct from just a plain filter behavior. And trim is at what point does that catch up. So if we go back to this, and you can hear and see that we're taking out some of those lows. But it's doing it in an interesting way. The way this algorithm works is it's generating a super low subsonic thing in the way that Creature does, which becomes somewhat saturated, meaning that you're going to have some extra punch in the lows without any other plugin or any other process adding them, because what we're doing is we're subtracting a kind of accentuated bass that is itself somewhat saturated and exaggerated. That also means if you add more than you need to cancel out, what you're going to get is bass boost, but the bass boost is out of phase, because that's how this is working. So if we get back into that again, let's go back to a really flat thing. We can show how this works with very few stages. And you can make it take out lots of bass this way. However, if we add beyond that point, we've now got a sort of combination thing where it's bringing a little extreme lows back in again in a distorted way while also canceling some of the extreme lows at the same time. And it doesn't really work like a elaborate crossover that can cancel out and form a node. Instead, it's just sort of doing its own thing. we can have even more steepness in here, at which point we can hear what it's doing. I'll bypass this as well while I'm at it. Flat. And then SubTight. And this is most effective at this tone shaping when it's not really canceling out all the lows anymore. See here we've strikingly changed the color of the sound using that. And this is what I built into essentially subsonics control for Console MC, which I have just re-released and is now fully functioning. As I've said, I'm mixing down some things using that, and there'll be more about that later. We can also fire up some noise to see what's happening there as we correct the volume of the noise. So if we increase trim, we see that we can kind of slope everything down and take out lows, but then if we add more, well, that starts coming back again. Bearing in mind, though, you would think that that would create a cancellation node, but what it's doing is it's creating a cancellation node dynamically, not in frequency terms, which is an interesting behavior. It's one of the reasons this is finding its way into the console stuff, is that I'm doing something that is not as... there's no DSP cookbook equivalent for this, really. So, if we are making this... well, how might we make this a little steeper? We can use the steep control. And as we bring that up, we have to increase the trim control a little bit to catch back up. And that's a bit of a steeper go. It's a bit of a tighter behavior, remembering, of course, that this is not actually doing a thing where it's canceling only down to frequencies of a certain point. There is a dynamic interaction here, which is not being represented in span. It's kind of similar to, I was in a conversation on Reddit the other day where I was explaining why I like Yamaha NS10s, and it's because of the waterfall plot behavior. It's the fact, it's not about having a frequency response, and this is why things like my monitoring plugin, which does have, mid-range style monitoring or cell phone mid-range style monitoring, where it'll simply take away the frequency ranges, that's not going to give you the same behavior as the small speaker boxes that people have gotten used to with these mix check speakers, or indeed the NS10s, because the deal with those is it's a sealed box with sort of small and cheap drivers that their energy dies away very quickly. So they don't have resonance, they don't have sustain. It makes a sound and then stops instantly. The way that SubTight works is it's interacting not simply on a frequency behavior, but there's also a dynamics behavior that enters into things as well. And it's meant to catch and tighten up the low frequency resonances at particular volume. It's a little complicated to explain. Some of this is simply about discovering the behavior of the algorithm as I try to experiment with things with it. So we'll go back to that noise so we can see what it's doing. And you can see that flat, you get here. And then the window of maximum cancellation is smaller. Then if we go all the way to extremely high steepness, isn't that interesting? I don't really use it in these ranges, but you can, if you want, you can use it in these ranges. And that's creating a weird side effect of the algorithm, which just goes to show you how different this is from normal filtering. And even in this context, I would say that the ideal way to use it is not causing that effect so much as it is pulling the trim back to where you're barely touching it. And this is how I dial stuff in for things like the console systems, is getting this stuff going and dialing it in so that maybe this particular behavior is less prevalent. But we're getting something useful out of it. And then pulling it back so it's not canceling everything as hard. See, that's only about 60 dB or so down. And we can hear the difference in the bass even on this noise. And that's what we're trying to make happen with this stuff. And I'm going to go in and do that again, but this time with the little drum track, such as it is. I pretty much just have my own stuff to fool with all this. So I've always designed these plugins so that you should take them and use them on your own things. And that's the real idea here. But we will jump back into the drums. We've got it turned up all the way. And if we're not doing any of this cancellation, this is what it sounds like. But then when we start bringing it in, all of a sudden we have a super, super different sound out of this without the processing. With it's a sharp little pop, and we can still see there's a lot of lows here because this is not a simple filter. It's doing a dynamic thing as well. And so since this is too exaggerated of an effect, and we can also hear it affecting the mid-range and everything, back to not doing anything with it. Then I'm pretty sure the way this one works is it's kind of just bringing in the deepest lows to do strange processing things with. So in working with this in the context of console plugins, what I've always done is pulled it back from the maximum, which is many stages of this effect. And we'll leave it somewhat exaggerated. Like what I've done in console MC is the setting would be around here, somewhere in here, and not necessarily the same for the channel and the bus plugins, because I'm trying to shape it to my tastes, to what I'm trying to make happening. We'll make the steepness a little more extreme without cranking it all the way. And now we'll listen to what this is doing. I can hear it doing something there. And that's very extreme. So over here is going to be barely doing anything. And as we bring in SubTight, we're going to get a processing effect which has a dynamic behavior rather than just a frequency behavior. And we can now feel a kind of spike on the kick drum, which is more than there originally was. It feels like it's being hit harder. Take it off. And we have the air and space around the kick drum. Turn it back on. And it's changing the character of how that hits the speakers. We can exaggerate it even more. And again, if I take it off, we can hear the lows coming in. Turn it on, we have a very similar character, but the shape of where it's sitting in the subsonics, in the lows, is different. And then, if we go back to our noise with exactly these same settings, we'll see that it is doing something very subtle. We can see the low end there. It's pulling back just barely a couple dB. If I make it more extreme, I can start really exaggerating the change there. And then if I go back to that drum track, the same thing we had before. Without, we've got this. And then we turn on the much stronger effect. And now we barely have any lows in there at all. And that is SubTight Redux. The whole idea of the Redux plugins is that all of the stuff that we've been listening to is 96K, and the original release of SubTight that I've just demonstrated in a bunch of different ways didn't handle the trim factor quite the same way. With this one, I feel like you're more likely to have comparable results when you're trying to find your settings across different sample rates. With the original release, the way that it wasn't doing those compensations, it ended up the effective trim setting would be higher the higher the sample rate went. And I made that adjustment to compensate for that. But you can probably tell how it threw me, because you look at the frequency response and there's no neat behavior in where it's responding to this stuff, for instance, on white noise. And if you push it too far, it's not creating a cancellation node, it's creating a dynamic cancellation node we don't really have that processing. So now you do. Now you have that processing, because we've got SubTight, and it's an open source plugin, and it is available to you for free because I get supported by Patreon. And that means there are people out there who are like, yeah, I'll throw you a couple of bucks a month or $1 a month, which is pretty much all the Patreons that I support are at $1 a month, because there's a bunch of them and I'm making a little over minimum wage. So I don't have that much spare booty to throw about. But I've been at this for a while, and I'm very dedicated to the stuff that I do. So, on that note, I will keep working on the stuff that I'm working on. I'm doing more in the way of live streams than I used to. And you'll see me typically doing that on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That seems to work out fairly well for me. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.